The Banished are a relatively new antagonist in the Halo universe, but in that time they've established themselves as a formidable fighting force. And while the vast majority of the constituent races of the Banished are the same races that made up the Covenant, their ideological differences to the Covenant make them very, very unique. Their scavenged, up-armoured and aggressive design aesthetic certainly make them stand out and is more akin to the Brute's natural technological origins. This is not to say by any extent of the imagination that the equipment, technology and weapons that they have available to them are in any way, shape or form primitive. Indeed, the very fact that the Covenant fell means that there was a huge power vacuum left over as a consequence, and with it, hundreds and thousands of weapons, vehicles, ships and technology ripe for scavenging by the Banished. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00 and more specifically, welcome to the Armory. This is where all weapons from Halo lore will be featured and analysed in detail. This is part 4 of a 4-part series looking at the Banished specifically in preparation for Halo Infinite. Links to the other videos are down below. As promised, today we look at all weapons and vehicles used by the Banished. Now before we get into the meat of this video, let's bear in mind that there are a good deal of Banished weapons that aren't really altered in any way, shape or form and are pretty much exactly as they were when the Covenant used them. I'll give them a passing mention, but I'm really interested in the ones that have been up-armoured or altered to meet the Banished's more aggressive design aesthetic. It's also worth bearing in mind that the Brutes do appear to have an innate, innovative tendency, whereas the Covenant were imitative. This innovative streak and the plethora of technology left over after the Covenant fell allowed the Brutes to scavenge weapons and innovate upon them, adding their own design aesthetic and aggressive nature into their designs, perfecting the weapons and vehicles of war to a more aggressive ends. So let's get an overview of these weapons. The Type 25 Spiker. The Spiker was first encountered by UNSC forces when used by Brute forces during the initial skirmishes on Harvest in 2525 and would remain a staple weapon of the Brutes and the Covenant shock troops throughout the Human-Covenant War. The Type 25 Spiker was detested by the Sangheili due to its primitive origins, but the weapon was allowed to be serviced in low numbers and even augmented with Covenant technology. I have previously covered the Spike Rifle in an Armory video, the link is in the description if you want full details, but where the Banished Spike Rifle differs is that while the base of the weapon is still practically identical, it now sports between 4 and 6 tungsten blades mounted around the weapon. The Spiker already sported 2 large bayonet attachments, but now is lined on practically every face with these bayonet blades. This makes the Spike Rifle a devastatingly effective melee weapon. There are also some changes in the projectile itself. Rather than being a near molten stake-like projectile, it now appears to be more so a shard of metal that has been twisted while it's still molten. This implies that the rifle itself now actually has rifling down the barrel or uses a gravimetric drive that creates a gravitic torsion down the barrel so that the metal is actually spun as it is fired. This likely increases its long-range accuracy and most likely makes it more damaging to tissue as it penetrates the body. The Type 25 grenade launcher, known to the UNSC as the Brute Shot, is a Covenant weapon designed and used exclusively by the Brutes, developed as an ancient clan weapon by the Jiralhane and eventually integrated into the Covenant weapon systems. This weapon has remained unchanged by the Banished, and again I have done an Armory video on the Brute Shot, again link is in the description. The Type 2 energy weapon / hammer, more commonly known as the Gravity Hammer, is a powerful close-quarters two-handed melee weapon used by the Brutes, and again has remained largely unchanged by the Banished. However, there are some unique permutations of the Gravity Hammer that have been seen to be used by certain Jiralhanae warlords within the Banished. One such variant used by Voridus features unique red energy blades that have been added to the weapon, and another unique variant used by an unnamed warlord that appears to feature fuel rods within the head of the hammer, which may or may not provide some form of fuel rod explosion as a consequence of being used. The Type 25 Brute Plasma Rifle is still in use by the Brutes of the Banished and remains largely unchanged. It is worth noting at this point that the red colour of the projectiles from the plasma rifle denote that it's a lower energy and thus a lower temperature, even though in game it appears to cause more damage. This is true of any energy-based weapon, including bayonets that are used by the Banished. Despite being red in colour, this does ultimately suggest that they are used at a lower energy impedance, meaning that they have a lower damage potential. But that is from a strictly physics point of view, and the likelihood is this choice of coloration was simply a design aesthetic as opposed to a function of how powerful the weapons really are. The Type 33 Fuel Rod gun is a shoulder-fired mortar weapon with a radioactive component. It was formerly used by the Covenant military and now in service with the Swords of Sanghelios and the Banished. It is also sometimes called the Flak Cannon or the Fuel Rod Cannon. This has ultimately remained largely unchanged by the Banished. The Type 1 Energy Sword is still used by elites within the Banished and remains completely unaltered. The Type 51 Carbine is still used by Jackals of the Banished, and that also remains completely unaltered. And the same goes for the Type 25 Plasma Pistol used by the Grunts of the Banished. Chainbreaker is a gravity mace and the signature weapon of Atriox himself. It was created using parts from a Type 2 gravity hammer. It still possesses the gravity manipulating technology that all Type 2 gravity hammers possess, but also features 3 red blade-like protrusions, and he has been seen using this weapon to devastating effect against the 3 Spartans of Red Team. Again, any and all weapons that I have covered in Armory videos are listed in the description down below if you want to see the full version of those videos. But now we will look at the vehicles of the Banished. The Blisterback is a previously unseen variant of vehicle that appears to be used exclusively by the Banished and doesn't actually appear to be an up armor or altered variant of any known weapon used by the Covenant. The vehicle is a hexapedal heavy air vehicle and walker. In its airborne configuration, it uses medium-range plasma cannons to bombard enemy ground and air targets from range. However, it can also land and enter a kind of lockdown mode, where it then uses long-range Annihilator Siege missiles to target ground targets exclusively. This VTOL vehicle is heavily up-armoured, but there are also 2 variants known as the Enduring Blisterback and the Ironclad Blisterback, which are both up-armoured again. The Shroud is a very clever support vehicle in that it possesses sophisticated active camouflage systems that cloak both itself and troops, vehicles and other ordnance near enough to it. It can then move with these forces, keeping the forces completely invisible to enemies nearby. When not using its cloaking system, it can use a point defense system which can block enemy projectiles from hitting the troops. Aside from this, however, there are no outwardly offensive capabilities of the Shroud. The Marauder is a fast, medium-sized vehicle used specifically for fighting infantry. It contains 1 pilot and 1 gunner, the gunner firing a heavy plasma turret and a complement of missiles. The Marauder can be up-armoured with additional armour plating, and its design dates back to pre-Covenant Jiralhanae, where it was used extensively in the Clan Wars and eventually during the World Wars that eventually destroyed their civilization. The Reaver is an anti-aircraft bipedal walker used by the Banished that takes down enemy aircraft by using an array of missiles, and it has been witnessed using the propulsion from these missiles to cover long distances in short amount of times and smash into enemies. The Spike turret is a large emplaced weapon used by the Banished, and despite its name actually fires large bolts of plasma from twin barrels. The Skitterer is an extremely fast scout walker, although it serves more of a role as a support vehicle. It's most often used as an overwatch platform which defends other friendly units and acts as a weapon turret and defense shield, although it does feature twin-linked beam cannons that are quite effective against infantry. The Banished Chopper is a heavily modified chopper as used by the Covenant during the Human-Covenant War and is heavily up-armoured. The Banished also make heavy use of the Banshee, the Wraith, the Locust, the Ghost and the Scarab. On top of this, the Spirit, Phantom and Lich are all heavily up-armoured to meet the Banished aesthetic. Some of these have been witnessed as being quite unstable, and this may be a consequence of the up-armouring. The additional mass on the vehicle means that the power source has to be effectively overclocked in order to compensate for that additional mass, and that makes the vehicle quite unstable. This is wholeheartedly redefining what brutes really are. Most of us, I'm sure, have the assumption in our head that brutes are simple creatures, aggressive but lacking in intelligence, strategy and critical thinking. Yet the innovations that they have made in the wake of the Covenant demonstrate quite clearly that the brutes are actually a victim of circumstance. We never got to see their innovative and strategic nature because they were ultimately suppressed by the elites and later the prophets. If you consider that one of the operative reasons as to why humanity did ultimately win the war was because the Covenant were imitative, which means their technology and their protocols didn't really develop and change over time, whereby humanity's was very innovative and we could change and adapt over time and take on new technologies which closed the technological gap between humanity and the Covenant. The Covenant's technological stagnation was one of the main reasons that humanity managed to fight them back and ultimately win the war. We do not have that luxury with the Banished. So given that the Banished are now fully confirmed for Infinite and the new Halo Infinite box art has been released showing a brute holding a gravity hammer in the reflection of Chief's visor, I think it's about time that we look at the weapons available to the Banished at this time, at least the ones that we know of, so we can be better prepared to take the Banished on. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below, I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons: Neek the Silent Cartographer, Brian, Sebastian, Red Sea, Darian, Stalker of the Realms, Falcon X003, Alvin DW, Flaming Halo and the Revanche, the Holders of the Mantle, my Glorious Reclaimers, my loyal Metarchs, and all the other patrons that have jumped aboard to support the channel. You guys are awesome, and all of this wouldn't be possible without you. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more of my time for me to put into this content and other Halo-related goodness. Take it easy everyone, and I will see you when at long last we get some Halo Infinite news of substance drop tomorrow. So until then, find peace in the domain.